Hello and welcome to Fearless DIY Music. My name is Tristan Lass, and today I wanted to talk about how I accumulated all of my gear. I know that in a few videos I have, been like, oh, you watch YouTubers and they have these big walls with all this super expensive stuff. Well, to a certain extent, I am as guilty as some of those people of having lots of equipment. It did not happen overnight. I am not a rich person. I am not subsidized by a company. I never have been. I've been a DIY musician my entire life, which is part of why I have so much different kinds of gear, and almost every different type of gear is because I self-produced almost everything that I've ever released as far as music goes. And, I want to be transparent. I want to talk a little bit about how I arrived at having all the stuff that's behind me here in the shop. And then all of them, I have a bunch of tools and stuff too, obviously, to be able to work on instruments and to build things. And also, when I shoot videos down in the studio, it's obvious that there are a lot of guitars down there and recording gear and a drum kit and yada, yada, yada. There's a lot of stuff. So I wanted to kind of talk about how I ended up having so much stuff. And it's not all because I'm a hoarder, because I am kind of a hoarder. I have a hard time getting rid of things sometimes. So I keep a lot of things, which brings me to number one on why I have so many guitars and so much stuff. The first thing on the list is that by the time I bought my first guitar, like that I bought for myself, in like 1985. So I rode my bicycle down to a pawn shop. I picked up a guitar off the wall, had no idea really what it was, but it looked like what Angus Young played. So I was like, that's cool. It was all beat up. I spent $75 on it. I rode with that guitar on my handlebar home, and I still have that guitar to this day. And it was a Guild S90. Basically, the Guild S100 is a 1971 Guild S90, same as an S100, except dot marks, no binding, and just a one tone and one volume control. So it was the budget version of a Guild S100. So I kind of lucked out with my first purchase. And a lot of, because that guitar is worth a lot of money today, and I still have it, but I bought it for 75 bucks in a pawn shop. And that's the early part of my acquisition story. I came across old pieces of gear that nobody wanted any longer. It was the mid-'80s. Everybody was into, Mesa Boogie and Jackson Soloists and all these, this very, everybody wanted the cutting edge stuff. And I rummaged through pawn shops and I bought old stuff. Like my 65 Showman head, that's not a showpiece. I bought that also for $75. And it was barely functional when I got it, and I didn't even know that. I just ran it for years with burned out tubes in it and was just like, it's got a cool tone. It's unique. So that early acquisition phase was a lot of that. It was a lot of buying things by saving for long periods of time. I worked, during the summers and as much as I could while I was in school. I was, just beginning high school, and every cent that I earned went towards gear. I would just buy anything that I could get my hands on that I thought was cool or I thought that would help me be a better guitar player. By the time, so I'm acquiring things at the beginning of high school, and I still have a lot of those pieces to this day. So I began with that. And then I, started trading and swapping things. And the trading thing is where the next phase of acquisition begins. I had a 1985 Les Paul Studio. I bought it used for $500, probably in 1989. I bought this guitar. I bought it for 500 bucks. It was the most I'd ever spent on an instrument. I loved it, but I got to a point with it where I was just like, there's something just about it that was rubbing me the wrong way. So I traded that guitar for two Tokai Stratocasters in like 1990. I have one of those Tokais to this day. But I began to realize that, you know, through the trading and selling back to the music stores in my hometown, that I was losing a little bit of money every time you know, obviously retailers want to make money. And so, and I mainly dealt with music stores because I was green and I wasn't, you know, and pawn shops. So I was green and I was taken advantage of a number of times, and I felt like, oh man, I'm getting ripped off. So that began the phase where I stopped selling things, and that kind of has never ended. I will hang on to things rather than sell them to get the next thing, because I don't like to lose money. I would rather acquire the new instrument by waiting or a piece of gear by waiting and saving up for it, rather than selling what I've got. Now, that part of the story will change a little bit, but during the 90s through the up till about 2010, for about 20 years, I did not sell anything. I basically was like, oh, I'm not happy with that, or I want something different, I'll buy another. And I would save up or use my gig money or whatever. So I bought a lot of stuff cheap because nobody wanted it in the 80s and early 90s. I quit selling stuff, and before I had to be out on my own, every cent that I earned while I was still living with my parents went towards gear. There was just nothing else I've spent money on. Okay. Another way that I've acquired a lot of my gear before I had a family and a wife was pure financial recklessness. I would get a credit card, or I would take out a student loan when I was in school during those times when I actually went to college. And I would take financial aid money or a brand new credit card, and I would buy gear. I would buy guitars. I would buy whatever. And I bankrupted myself twice doing that. Like, I had to go to, you know, credit remediation and, you know, have all my credit cards canceled, then pay back in payments. I did that twice in my life, all before the age of 32. I bankrupted myself twice just buying gear. I would buy recording equipment. I was like, I'm going to build a studio. I don't have any money to build a studio. I'll apply for a credit card. I'll buy all the stuff. I'll make the money back. And of course, I never, you know, that doesn't work out. At least it didn't work out for me. I went for broke twice in my life, and I kept all of it until I didn't need certain components of it. But yeah, that's another way that I accumulated a lot of my gear, was just sheer financial irresponsibility, which I advise everybody who sees this and hears the words coming out of my mouth, don't do it. Save up, find another way, move things around, but don't max out credit cards to buy gear. Please do not do that. And that's one of the reasons why I started this channel, is to talk about, you know, budget stuff or rehabbing stuff or modifying things, so that you don't make the mistakes that I did, where it was just like, I would just go buy things at retail prices, go into a store, be like, I'll take that, 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 and that, and walk out. And it was dumb. Now, sitting here looking back at it and having a lot of those pieces still hanging on the wall, I go, okay, well, it worked out for me, but it doesn't always. And sometimes you can just lose everything in that kind of, you know, if you've got that kind of process. Let's see here. Okay, well, we'll talk really quickly about another way, is that if I had any family money, like let's say, you know, an uncle passes away and I got a little inheritance, I would use any sort of money that fell into my lap like that, did not go to paying off that credit card debt, I would buy more gear. So that's another way that I acquired some of my gear. Not a huge percentage, but, you know, a significant amount. I mean, significant enough. Let's see. I had a large rehearsal space / studio for many years, and I worked with a number of different bands throughout my professional career that, you know, I was in spaces, and I supplied a lot of gear for spaces. I used to have a full PA system, like a club level PA system that I lugged around with me. And it's like when I joined a new band or I built a new band, I would be like, I've got a rehearsal PA that we're all set. I owned, you know, I used to have this giant, you know, PA system that I lugged around. And sometimes my PA would get mixed in with other people's gear. Long story short, I worked in a lot of spaces where I supplied the bulk of the gear. And then at the end, when things go south or the space is no longer being used or people are using were using my space and then left, a lot of times as a form of payment for time, rather than paying rent and stuff like that, people would just give me stuff. Be like, oh, well, you can have those power amps, or you can have those compressors, or you can have this or that. Or sometimes people actually would literally just disappear. You know, the rock scene in the late 90s, early 2000s in Portland, Oregon, I would just like, you know, be like, oh, I haven't seen, you know, that person disappeared and they left all their crap here. And, you know, I'd put out feelers and be like, hey, can somebody come tell them to come get all their stuff? And sometimes that stuff never left. And that stuff just came with me wherever I went from that point forward. And it's like, if they ever want it back, hit me up. I might, you know, if somebody sees this video and they're like, oh, I left a piece of gear at Triss's place 25 years ago, you know, there's a good chance I might have it. And if I do, I will give it back, I swear. But I inherited a lot of things through just that process. Because I did a lot, I played live for a long time and I played with lots of different people. And I would supply a lot of equipment and other people would throw their gear in. And sometimes it just, I was the guy with the van and the space. So I would, you know, end up with stuff. So that happened quite a bit. I've also received a lot of my gear and some guitars as a form of payment. Like, let's say somebody brings me, well, here's an example of that. Somebody here locally, many years ago, wanted me to work on some amplifiers. I worked on the amplifiers, and rather than give me cash, he handed me a 2004 made in Mexico Strat. He's like, here, I've got this Strat. Would you be cool with just like me giving you this guitar and you fix the amps? And I was like, sure. You know, I won't, and that's one of my problems. I am, you know, I have gas hard. So it's just like, oh, you're going to give me a guitar and all I have to do is fix some amps. I mean, I was just like, sure, I'll take the guitar. And that happens more than you think. So I have taken a fair number of things in as a method of payment. Also, friends or people who have owed me in the past too have sometimes compensated me with like, oh, well, here, I'll give you this instrument, and we're square. And of course, they know that, you know, if somebody hands me, you know, like a Gibson LGO and goes, and this happened, it's just like, here, you can have this, and we're square. And I'm like, oh yeah, sure, we're square. So I've acquired a fair number of instruments that way as well. Big one. I worked as a music store manager for about, how many years was it? 2006. I worked for about 6 years, 5.5 years. I worked at a music store. One of the reasons why I have a decent collection of acoustic guitars is because I worked at a high-end acoustic guitar store. So I had the employee discount going for me, and I also had my finger on the pulse of the main store where all the electric stuff and recording gear stuff was. I could buy things at, you know, a small percentage over cost. And prior to having our first child, I would, you know, it'd be like, oh, wow, I had a great month. I sold, you know, some expensive Martins. So I'm going to take the extra money and buy some more gear. So I bought a lot of beer, and I bought a lot of beer, but I bought a lot of gear at just barely over cost because I worked at a music store. And that is another way that I acquired a lot of the things that I have. And then most recently, most of the things that I have recently acquired, like if you have watched the channel from day one, or if you go back and look at some of my earlier videos, any new instruments that you have seen, like where I go, oh, I just got this, you know, I just got this Jaguar. All of my most recent acquisitions have come from the fact that I liquidated my PA system. I liquidated my analog studio gear, and it was a pile a big, big pile of stuff. And I sold it all at prices that I am shocked that I got. I got my asking price on almost every piece of gear that I have sold over the past 3 years during the process of arriving at having a YouTube channel and arriving at, you know, the current recording setup I have, which is DAW based. You know, I've switched over, and liquidating all of that analog stuff and the PA system provided me with a fair amount of money. So I sold a lot of stuff that I had either purchased, used, or had been given, or had acquired, or bought, you know, at a steep discount. I sold all of that stuff at fair market value recently. And that is kind of the story of how I arrived at having as much stuff as I do. I have very rarely, I mean, aside from the financial ruin eras of my life where I just bought and did not, you know, think about the consequences of what I was doing, I have been very thrifty. I have been very lucky. I have been incredibly lucky. There are so many instruments that I could pull off the wall and go, yep, I was given this. And it's just, you know, jaw drop, you know, and people go, somebody gave that to you? And it's just happened to me. I've been very, very fortunate. I suppose that the point of this video, like I said, is for transparency, is to be like, you know, well, how do you end up with so much stuff when sometimes you're criticizing other people that have all this stuff? You know, I can't, you know, I'm throwing rocks at a glass house for sure, sometimes. So I just wanted to be forthright in how I acquired my stuff, the processes that I went through to get it, and how just a lot of it dropped in my lap. And a lot of it was stuff that just was either abandoned or people just didn't want or was not desirable at the time. Because you got to think, going back to the 80s and through a lot of the 90s, vintage gear or cool, you know, cool stuff from the 70s was not coveted. It was considered trash. So I would buy trash for no money, and now I still have it, and everybody's like, man, that is some cool stuff that you've got there. And I'm like, yeah, when I bought it, I was just like getting by, you know. So anyway, I just wanted to be forthright with it all and kind of, you know, check myself a little bit, because I realize I'm incredibly lucky, and I am incredibly lucky to have as much stuff as I do. And I don't want to be in denial about that. And I also don't want to be coming off as being, you know, like somehow like, you know, I'm better than anybody else who has a ton of guitars. We're all, you know, anybody watching this, and anybody doing what I do, we love the stuff. We get as much of it as we can. We kind of do it any way that we can find to get more and more and more. Because it's just kind of, you can never have enough guitars, right? I mean, am I wrong about that? At least in my world. I wish so much, and sometimes I fantasize about doing this, and maybe one day I will. I would love to get down to just having, like, you know, I have a couple of electrics and an acoustic guitar, and those are just the only things that I play. And really dig into them and really love them and play them exclusively. And maybe one day I'll get there, but I'm not there yet. And we're going to keep getting stuff, modding stuff, and having fun. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. If you've made it this far in the video, I would really appreciate it if you'd hit the subscribe button and the like button, and please share. Subscriptions are going up. I mean, and the comment section's going great. I really, really, really appreciate everybody who's been watching and paying attention and having fun. And I would love it if anybody out there who does have a rather large collection or has stories to share on how they've gotten gear in an unorthodox way, or things gifted to them, or maybe they've bankrupted themselves as well, I'd love to hear those stories and see them in the comments. Anyway, take care, and we'll see you next time.